Welcome to meeting number 34 of the House of Commons, Standing Committee on Government Operations and Estimates, of course known far and wide as the mighty OGO. Before we welcome everyone back from the Easter break, just a reminder, please, do not rustle your papers near the microphones while you're speaking because it causes distress to our valued interpreters. And please keep your headphones or earphones away from the mic at all times as well. And do not touch the mic either. We're continuing with our CER study. There's no opening statement, I understand, so we're going to go right to our questions. Mr. Patzer, you're up for 6 minutes, please.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair, and thank you very much, everybody, for joining us here today. We appreciate the time. Just going to jump right into it then. When Finance called for the spending review, which has led to layoffs, did you advise departments to make sure cuts would be proportionate between the national capital and the other regions of Canada?
Thank you for the question. Just to say up front, I'm new in this position. I've been in this position for 2.5 months. I'll defer some of my questions to Thomas LaRouche. She's our Director General of Budget Planning and obviously predates me at the department, so we'll be able to go deeper into some of the questions you'll be posing this afternoon. I don't believe there was any particular direction on kind of regional proportions associated with the proposed spending reductions.
Okay, and then do you guys in finance, or do you know if anybody in the government gives a directive on what a rural lens would look like? And do you have a definition that you use for rural?
Go ahead, Tom.
Thank you. It's a good question. So we don't have, what I will say is in the exercise, the comprehensive expenditure review, the directive was for departments to use gender-based analysis plus. Gender-based analysis plus looks at impact on a variety of stakeholders across demographic characteristics. It could include rural, but it's not a specific rural lens. The idea is that in doing their comprehensive expenditure review proposals, departments would be looking at these impacts, preparing the analysis, and that has been submitted with the proposal. So that would be the extent to which rural impacts would be factored in, but there is no separate rural lens applied per se.
And did you say that the GBA Plus lens is your department did, or were all departments across the entirety of the government instructed to use that lens?
So it would be all departments. So right, it was guidelines, directives that were provided. There were templates issued by the Treasury Board Secretariat, and when departments were preparing the proposals, they had to complete this analysis and submit it. This is not Department of Finance who did it on behalf of proponents. It's the proponents themselves.
Okay, interesting. Yeah, there was other folks here in this study earlier who said that lens was actually not applied in many cases. So I find that to be interesting. Do you think that departments should consider the return on investment for spending items before deciding to cut them?
I'm sorry, like for every dollar saved, there would be a return on that dollar saved in terms of what? If you just unpack that for me.
No, not necessarily that. More so like, I mean, obviously the government spends a lot of money, and when they spend money, are they getting a return on that investment, right? So I'm just curious to know if that's a consideration for the government and for your department when you're going through cuts. Were people looking to see if there was actually a good return on the investment of the item that they were cutting before they cut it?
I guess, you know, my expectation was that departments in submitting their proposals and central agencies, whether it be the Treasury Board Secretariat or the Department of Finance, when reviewing those proposals, would have assessed the lowest performing, lowest efficiency programs for reduction. So the higher efficiency and higher performing programs, i.e. if there was a higher return on investment, whatever that return unit would have been, social returns, economic returns, would have been held harmless.
And then, so would you consider, say, a 32-to-1 ROI a good return?
Well, I mean, if I was in the private sector and I was giving a 32-to-1 ROI, I'd be pretty excited. But in terms of whatever that return metric is in the departmental program setting, I'm sorry, sir, it's hard for me to assess.
Okay. No, I was just curious because the Department of Agriculture, the cuts to the research and to the research stations, agriculture has a 32 to 1 return on investment for the investment in research, and we're seeing drastic cuts. So one of the hardest hit departments in cuts is the research side of agriculture. And the University of Saskatchewan has also confirmed that there's a return of investment of 32 to 1, and in some cases greater than that on investment in research for agriculture. So I would just strongly encourage that going forward, that return on investment actually seriously be looked at and considered and going forward. Now, I just wanted to ask you a question. You know, despite the CERs, it's been reported that that finance has had the biggest year-over-year increase in budgetary spending. That just has something to do with higher interest payments on our national debt. Can you tell us how much today you'll be spending on interest charges this year?
Well, in the budget, we would project interest charges. Tamara, you can help me with this.
This year, 60
25-26 year that we just closed was 55.6 billion, and this coming year, the 26-27 year, is 60 billion, as projected in budget 2025.
Does it worry you that that number keeps going up and up?
Does it worry me?
Yeah.
I mean, yeah. I mean, that's what I'm paid to do, is be very worried about our fiscal framework. So, you know, lower public debt charges is better than higher public debt charges. I would admit that.
Yeah. Okay. So how on earth are we going to get to a path where we can actually lower that? Now, I know there's some fancy words about, you know, a stable level, but stable doesn't mean it's going down. And if it's ever increasing, that's not good. How are we going to get it lower?
I mean, there's listen, I'm not going to like wave my hands here. There's different ways to define lower. Lower is a percentage, is a proportion of your economy, so as a percentage GDP. And in that context, public debt charges are trending lower. But just on a nominal value basis, I mean, I admit they're going higher. And
Thank you very much. Mr. Gasparo, please.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Chair. Thank you all for joining us, and thank you for your service. As you all know, the IMF released a World Economic Outlook today, and it presents a challenging global economic outlook driven by the conflict in the Middle East and the subsequent elevated oil prices. The IMF reports that despite these pressures, Canada is forecasted to have the second highest real GDP growth rate in the G7 at 1.5%. Can you comment on how recent global shocks have affected the Canadian economy and how we are weathering the storm more broadly?
sure, thank you for the question. Well, I mean, the 2025 year that we've just closed was pretty bumpy. In terms of just our GDP growth path. There was a lot of turbulence in and around Liberation Day and the anticipation leading up to the announcement of I'll call them the Trump tariffs, and a pull forward in economic activity ahead of that, and then a bit of a lull in economic activity coming out of the April Liberation Day announcements. And then likewise, towards the end of the year, there was turbulence in and around, obscure things in economic accounts like inventories and export and import mismatches. So the 2025 year was bumpy, but all signs is that there was a pretty strong handoff into the 2026 year, so momentum has been pretty good. Business investment seems a little bit stronger. Sentiment indicators seem that activity is going to pick up, so that's helpful. With respect to the conflict in the Middle East, I mean, I think we can all acknowledge that as an oil or energy exporting country, this is going to affect us less than it's going to affect other energy importing countries in the G7. So we're projecting economic growth in and around 1.5, which is aligned with what was published this morning, which is considerably stronger than economies in Europe and Asia that are more exposed to what's going on in the Middle East. So that's encouraging. But in the same breath, I mean, Canadians are going to feel inflationary pressures associated with higher energy prices. Those inflationary pressures are going to feed into potentially a drag on financial conditions, which might make interest rates higher and tighten other financial condition indicators like equity markets or other borrowing rates. So that's a concerning more broadly for the economy. So we have to kind of balance the good and the bad and think about the distribution of growth across Canada and how government policy kind of best fits into that.
Thank you for that very detailed answer. it obviously coincides quite well with the IMF's economic outlook as well globally, that there's going to be a global rise in inflation, with emerging markets being more affected simply because they import most of their energy. So I'm glad you touched on that, and I appreciate it. So in light of the global economic shocks that that you referred to, can you speak to some of the steps we are taking to make Canada's economy more resilient?
Sure. I mean, the government has it set in motion a path to increase, non-residential business investment and housing investment, but investment in energy sector, trade corridors, other infrastructure. So if that was, a sound policy set before the conflict in the Middle East, we could probably be more confident that it is a sound policy direction now. It seems that, Canada, just in terms of brand, as being, sound economic framework, probably a less risky environment than perhaps other energy exporters these days, does bode well for perhaps, business investment intentions going forward.
Right. Chair, how much time do I have?
You've got a minute 30.
Okay, great. Thank you. Just moving on to operating versus capital expenditure. We've spent a lot of time here at committee talking about the separation between operating and capital expenditures. And I'm hoping you can just touch on, in your opinion, what impact will that have in terms of our ability to lower our operating costs and investing more in capital investments, and some of the impacts that would have on the Canadian economy.
Yeah, well understood. I might turn to Thomas for the answer to this.
So, thank you. It's a very good question. So, we should say this separation, I mean, again, it's an additional lens that has been introduced by the government. It's supplementary information. It's helping guide decision-making to channel government activity towards capital formation. I would say, in general, I mean, it does two things, right? It's one of the government's anchors. The government has two fiscal anchors. It's allowing the government to keep an eye on day-to-day operating spending, and ensuring that the commitment is that by 28-29, day-to-day operating spending will be matched by revenues, and that's a key fiscal anchor as a guide towards better fiscal management and fiscal discipline. And the commitment is that 28-29, the deficit as projected in budget 2025 will be entirely composed of capital investment. And so when you take decisions, this is helping keep a focus on the objective, which is to stimulate capital formation. Now, I mean, if we have questions,
I'm sorry, I have to interrupt you. We're past our time.
Okay, thank you.
Madame Gaudreau, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Let's talk about the future. I'm very concerned for future generations. I'll start over. We'll say the time didn't count. Future generations, I'm very concerned about what will happen. But after 2029, we're talking about massive spending, a significant portion for defense, but concretely, the burden. What are we transferring to future generations? Do you have numbers? People want to know what will happen after 2029, maybe in 20 or 30 years. Debt per capita. Have you assessed the long-term impact for public services, for example? We're talking about Canada Post. I'd like to hear your perspective.
Merci beaucoup pour la question.
Thank you very much for the question.
The long-term fiscal sustainability report is part of the budget. And underlying that are many variables, so assumptions on productivity, population growth, and such. Now, in that analysis, we demonstrate the government's fiscal framework as sustainable in terms of like its debt load doesn't outgrow its GDP over the long term. again, subject to those assumptions. So it's part of the analysis that we inform the government and the government puts forward as part of its budget.
OK. Ma prochaine question, on peut pas
My
plus
next question, we can't do everything at the same time. We're well aware of that. But regarding ranking priorities, my question is, what is planned between defense, public services, and structural investments?
Merci pour la question. Donc, si je
Thank you for
comprends
the question. If I've understood correctly, I just want to understand the question well. You're talking about how the government will prioritize defense vis-a-vis the others. As I explained earlier, the government has put in place a guide for investment by separating measures from operating spending and investments. That helps the government prioritize the spending it wants to focus on. So for defense, most infrastructure investments, which, as you've said, are structural investments, are classified as investment spending. And for defense, part of the spending will be classified as investment and will be prioritized. So it's a bit of a guide for decision making that the government has put in place to help make the right choices for the goals. I won't hide that I'm very concerned about the new regulatory sandboxes and the leeway there. So it will be managing priorities in a way that really concerns me. And so I have a question about the safety net, the social safety net. We already have huge pressure. Well, I'm talking about transfers to Quebec and the provinces, social programs, services to Canadians. How can we guarantee that the social safety net won't be affected? People are worried.
Merci pour la question.
Thank you for the question.
There's no guarantees. I mean, there's a revenue line and an expense line, and A minus B equals a surplus or a deficit. So in order to ensure that these programs, Old Age Security, Canada Health Transfer, Canada Social Transfer, employment insurance, are sustainable over the long term, we need to be very careful in terms of revenues, our tax base, growing the economy, ensuring that we don't erode the base just from a tax policy perspective, and ensuring that the expenses, whether they be statutory expense profiles, old age security, or non-statutory programs and services that are being delivered by the department, that they are sustainable over the long term.
Je suis vraiment inquiète.
I'm very concerned, I'll admit, because we're making choices, and you're talking about priorities. When there are priorities, that means things are not prioritized. With the social safety net, I'm thinking of healthcare services to seniors, the most vulnerable we've seen in Quebec, regarding community organizations. These are signals that there are issues that are not just isolated to one sector. And it concerns me. I'd really like us to be aware if there are adjustments, if priorities are a little bit broader, to reassure people, because they trust. We've seen it with democracy, but the walk will need to follow the talk, and people are very concerned. I have a few seconds left. I'll wait for my 2.5 minutes later.
Thanks. We'll go to Mr. Halan. Welcome to Ogo, Mr. Halan.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you to the officials for being here. Will this spending review reduce the deficit?
The spending review itself will not reduce the deficit.
Okay. I just wanted to confirm, because the Secretary of the Treasury Board also admits the same thing, that this would most likely not reduce the deficit. What would be the point of the review then if we're not reducing costs for Canadians?
From my perspective, just as a bureaucrat advising ministers, I mean, it provides an opportunity to reallocate, from some programs and services towards others.
But one would think that we have such a massive deficit. This government has doubled the deficit since the last Prime Minister left, Justin Trudeau, that to be responsible, one might think that the review would be in one part to reduce costs, and that's not happening, obviously. So again, like, what would be the point of that? What's the point of the review?
Well, I mean, just the blueprint is to stop doing some things and do more of others. I mean, quite frankly, so the intent and spirit of intent, I think, of the process was to reallocate away from low-performing, low-priority programs and take the proceeds of the savings associated with that and allocate towards other initiatives and other priorities.
And it wouldn't be savings, correct? I mean, we're just spending it somewhere else.
No, I mean, I totally admit on net, there's no net savings to the fiscal framework.
What is the interest on the debt?
If I understand the question, I think I answered that. It's projected to be $60 billion this year.
Right. And can you tell me what goes to healthcare transfers to the provinces?
I don't want to get this wrong because the health transfer for the 26-27 year, so this fiscal year, is $57.4 billion.
Okay. So we're basically, because of the spending of the government, of the Liberals, there's more money going to the interest on the debt that Canadians have to pay than what's going to healthcare transfers. So bankers and bondholders are getting more money than doctors and nurses, right? Is that how I'm reading it? Am I correct in that?
Yeah, I'm fearful for you to put words in my mouth, but I would agree just on the nominal value of public debt charges versus the nominal value of the Canada Health Transfer. Yes, sir, that's the dynamic.
Right, right. And is that concerning to you at all, that more money is going to interest on the debt than it is to healthcare transfers for the provinces?
I mean, what I can say is these public debt charges are associated with, I guess, $1.5 trillion in marketable debt. I mean, that debt is associated with however many generations of decisions by current and previous governments.
Right. But would it not be more responsible in a time like we are right now? Because at the end of the day, who's going to be paying for that debt? It is Canadians and generations of Canadians, and in the form of taxes, most likely. Would it not be more responsible for us to, let's say, find savings wherever there's wasteful spending, so we can bring down the deficit? Would that be something that would make a little bit more sense?
I think from my perspective, it's that deficits are sustainable, that our debt load is manageable, and that there's a fiscal track that can demonstrate some level of fiscal sustainability.
The reason why I bring that up is because in certain people in Canada are paying more in taxes now than they are for all the necessities combined, housing, clothing, and we're hearing about 2.2 million Canadians going into a food bank in a single month. So whether it's sustainable or not, at the end of the day, it's the taxpayer, it's the Canadians that are having to take on that burden. So that's why would you think it would be more responsible to help lower that pressure on Canadians rather than piling on more and finding savings, let's say, for within this review?
And I think, what do I think? What do I know? I mean, I know there was this process was an effort to make sure that government was operating as efficiently as it could, that programs and services that were low performing, that maybe would be considered wasteful, were eliminated, and the proceeds of that exercise was reallocated to other programs and services. So I don't want to be argumentative, sir. I mean, I agree with the principle of what you like.
Yeah, that's so. Go ahead.
Ms. Rochford, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And maybe to follow in line with the questions from my colleague from across the room, just wondering about your views with the statement that the overall intent of the comprehensive expenditure review is not about austerity. It's not about cuts, but about enabling strategic investments to modernize the Canadian government and to ensure that our country is better positioned for the 21st century. So I'm wondering what your views are with regards to that particular statement.
Well, I mean, I would agree with that statement. I do have a balanced view. I mean, I can see both sides. There's those who would advocate for just a lower deficit profile, a more aggressive path to lower nominal deficits. But I also understand that deficit consolidation can be a drag on growth itself. And with the current government, it has a perspective that it wants to take the proceeds of the exercise and reinvest those proceeds into government efforts, government initiatives, programs, services that deliver a return, either economic and social, to Canadians that it thought was beneficial.
In Budget 25, I see you have it with you. It specifies that the savings to be achieved would fall into three categories. They say to modernize government operations, to recalibrate government programs, and to streamline program delivery. And dollar targets were set for each of the three themes or three areas. Are you satisfied that the results of the comprehensive expenditure review are lining up with these targets that were set?
Thank you. I'm going to ask Tomas
Oui,
to
c'est
answer
bon.
that. Yeah.
Merci.
Thank you very much. It's a good question. Well, I mean, the budget, I mean, it's a plan. What we, at this moment, in our view, the comprehensive expenditure review is being rolled out as planned. And so the idea was that, in these three categories, the next step now, and as you heard from my colleagues at the Treasury Board Secretariat, is to effect these reductions through the main estimates. Those have been now tabled. And in general, I mean, these three themes sort of give you a flavor of the intents behind the review, which is really focused on efficiencies, modernizing government operations. That is about maybe give or take between 55 and 58% of total savings. And this is focused on the back office efficiencies, reducing administrative functions, leveraging new technology. So really to be more productive with existing resources. And as well, when we look at recalibrating government programs, the idea behind that stream was really to look at programming that, as the deputy said, was lower value or maybe not performing as intended, because there are really better uses for those resources. So this was the plan that was set out in the budget. At this moment, this has been affected in the main estimates for 26-27, and it's going according to plan.
Are you in any way concerned, coming back to my colleague's question about the turmoil in the world, economic conditions, that they might derail this particular plan as we move forward?
Well, I mean, the government is always looking at conditions and ready to react as necessary. But, I mean, one thing that's important to keep in mind is in a very large organization like the Federal Public Service, I mean, it has a lot of different departments. It's good practice to look at spending and to be more efficient, regardless of the country. And the OECD says that. A lot of observers say that. So it's a good thing to look at our spending and see where we can be more efficient.
So this was not just an across-the-board exercise, cuts, and this was not at all what this comprehensive expenditure review was all about. I've heard that said.
Well, it has features of both. So in the budget, what is said in the budget is that it's not across the board in the sense that the targets are variable. They vary by organization. So, for example, defense, the security organizations, RCMP, CBSA, have lower targets, and it's a recognition of there are government priorities in this area, and one of the design features of the review was to really minimize impacts on the safety and security of Canadians. As well, the Department of Indigenous Services, Crown Indigenous Affairs, and Women and Gender Equality also have lower targets. And so the targets sort of vary by organization, and in that sense, it's not a one-size-fits-all across-the-board cut.
Merci. Thank you.
Thanks very much. Madame Gaudreau.
Donc, je vais continuer dans ma série.
I will continue in my series of questions. We're talking about an energy transition and green growth. We know, I think you agree with me, that a climate transition requires massive investment. And I'm wondering, how does the government plan to maintain commitments and do more for the environment and in green growth when the priorities are others, including defense?
Le gouvernement a
The
annoncé
government has announced in the budget, the government talked about a climate strategy. I think the government is working on its approach. Details will be forthcoming.
Le prochain énoncé économique?
In the next economic statement, I couldn't confirm or deny that today. Okay, because my question is, how will we have a vision between security, climate transition, and of course, economic growth? How do we balance all of that? I know we want to be more efficient with all of our resources, but there's a lack of clarity. That's why we're here today. I wonder, when choices are made, I tend to ask the following question. Will there be surprises down the road when the explanation of the priorities doesn't allow us to explain to people why those particular investments are made? Because for people's daily lives, they might want to think of the future, but young people aren't able to buy a first home. People who are 65 to 74 are still left behind. People don't have what they need with services that cost 5 times the cost, with technological tools that are not efficient. It's hard to believe. How are these priorities set? Are you just given that and then you have to deal with it and find the numbers and then it's sent to the PBO and fingers crossed?
I mean, to some extent, it is very difficult. I mean, I think the government is challenged with reconciling all of the things that you outlined, national defense, economic growth, aging population, certainly sovereignty. I mean, just in the last 48 hours, the reaction around this anthropic mythos and having a domestic, pan-Canadian and international view on how to prepare ourselves for that. And usually, I mean, it's all associated with, a potential draw on the fiscal framework. And so we have to be very careful about, where that incremental spending decision, I said, as a bureaucracy advising the government where an incremental dollar is spent, recognizing that there's a broad waterfront of pressures, and then trying to maintain, a real firm footing on as your colleague said, fiscal sustainability. And I'm not giving you the entire laundry list, amidst pressure on interest rates, household debt loads. So it is a challenge, but that's kind of part of the challenge, and we do our best to advise the government to navigate that.
Ben, ma dernière question, c'est quel est
My last question is, what is at the beginning you said, here's our advice, but there's nothing better than really being in it to see how we'll reach the results based on forecasts. And a budget is a plan, and everything that happens geopolitically, there's back and forth, we know that. But we want to reassure people. So what can we tell people today, concretely, for what's coming in the next economic statement and decisions that have been made that are operationalized now?
Brief answer, please.
Well, in this context, I mean, that the government's committed to fiscal sustainability, it's committed to investing in the economy, it's committed to working with provinces across the country to deploy its agenda.
Thanks. Mrs. Jensen, please.
Thank you, Mr. Leswick. It's very refreshing to hear you talk about, two sides to a coin, so that's wonderful. Now, I wonder, I want to start by taking us back for a moment. So when I sat on Finance Committee, We studied the fallout from the Panama Papers, one of the largest financial leaks in history. And what did we hear at that time? We heard that billions of dollars were being routed through shell companies, hidden in offshore jurisdictions, shielded from transparency, and in many cases beyond the reach of enforcement. We heard plain as day that Canada really had a problem, and not a small one, a structural one. So the agency at the center of that fight is FINTRAC. This is the body responsible for tracking suspicious financial transactions, identifying money laundering, and passing intelligence to law enforcement. It's literally the follow the money agency. So here's my problem. At the very moment when financial crime is becoming more sophisticated, when we're dealing with fentanyl trafficking, organized crime, sanctions evasions, international capital flows, we're now talking about cuts to FINTRAC. Cuts. So I just want to connect it to something a little bit more recent. So we've seen repeated concerns about Canadian money, pension money, investment capital flowing through offshore jurisdictions like Bermuda or the Cayman Islands. And we know that Brookfield, who our Prime Minister is linked to, has investment structures involving offshore jurisdictions. To be clear, offshore structures are not automatically illegal, but that's exactly the point. That's what we learned from the Panama Papers, that the issue isn't always illegality, it's lack of transparency. Now, it's the ability to move money through complex structures where ownership is obscured, tax obligations are minimized, and accountability becomes optional. And that's precisely the space that FINTRAC is supposed to monitor. So let me ask the obvious question. How can we possibly claim to be serious about financial transparency when we're making cuts to the very agency tasked with detecting suspicious financial flows? When it comes to the actual enforcement capacity, we're pulling back. It seems to me it's like installing a state-of-the-art alarm system and firing the security guard. So here's my question to the officials. If FINTRAC is expected to do more, track more transactions, enforce higher penalties, monitor increasingly complex financial flows, how can it do it with fewer resources?
Yes, and thank you for the question. And to be honest, I mean, I feel vulnerable here saying really anything about FINTRAC without FINTRAC actually at the table, speaking to how they would have affected their proposed reductions. But I would agree with the premise of your question in terms of, FINTRAC's accountability on intelligence and supervision, in particular around AML, like anti-money laundering and anti-terrorist financing. And its general surveillance around, just suspicious transactions, whether they be in offshore tax havens or moving money in and out of money services businesses. I mean, the list goes on. They're not at the table, so I can't speak on where they would have sourced their savings proposals. I mean, all I can say is I would hope that an organization like FINTRAC, and I'm not speaking necessarily about FINTRAC, would have not reduced its resourcing from areas of that enormous priority that you outlined.
And I know at the time when we were doing the study on FINTRAC, they were very clear they are already under-resourced. So to me, this makes absolutely no sense that they're going to even have less resources. So I'm concerned about what message it sends to those that are trying to hide their money. I mean, move money, launder money through our system. Like we're saying, we were under-resourced already. You can look it up on Hansard. And now we're taking even further funds away.
I share your concern, and I'm not going to sugarcoat it. I mean, our expectation of FINTRAC and any other organization is where they could have found, their savings and potential like administrative efficiencies. And I know that sounds very generic, but in an organization like FINTRAC, where they receive tens and hundreds of thousands of suspicious transaction reports, I mean, that's their bread and butter. Like, how many people, are there systems, are there efficiencies, are there thresholds, are there ways that you could be working with financial institutions in order to economize that effort? I mean, that's the spirit of, I think, what was trying to, the spirit of this exercise, but I don't want to dilute your point in terms of the message that you're sending and the importance of FINTRAC's work.
So I come from Vancouver, close to Vancouver. I'm about an hour out. And if there's one thing that we've learned, it's the money laundering through housing, through the opioids, through the casinos. Honestly, it blows my mind from the location where I come from, the damage that has been done in that area, and that now we're going to have less oversight because we're going to have less money going to FinTrack, which was, like I say, and I think that was 5 years ago, was already under-resourced. It doesn't make sense to me. We can see that our Canadian, the fabric of our society is being hurt by this, and FinTrack is getting less money.
Yeah, I would completely agree. And the chairman, Mr. Magali, has often cautioned me about the separation between government and officials like me at these committees. So what I'll say is, it's not a plug for the government or the minister, but the minister is absolutely seized with what you just said. I mean, he made an appearance in Surrey. He has a very perspective on this follow the money strategy. He was in Surrey a few weeks ago. He was in Brantford. He's completely seized with the point that you're making, and he's deployed FinTrack in that context.
To me, that makes no sense. 5 years ago, they were already under-resourced. So that's the last of my statements is just there's less money and there's more trouble. So I don't see this working.
And all I can say is maybe I can show up at this committee 6 months from now and with FinTrack and talk about the progress in the area that you're talking about specifically and the resourcing associated with that. Just my commitment to you and the committee.
Perfect.
Yeah.
Hopefully it'll be FinTrack and you, not FinTrack and Mythos instead. Ms. Khalid, please, 4 or 5. And then we're going to go to Mrs. Block, and then we'll finish with Mr. O'Rourke.
Thank you very much, Chair. So just carrying on that point, just recently the Minister of Finance announced a collaborative effort between FinTrack and local law enforcement agencies that work together with each other, which for me is a lot more efficient in combating financial crimes such as extortions and money laundering. So, when we're talking about finding efficiencies, to me, that's the scope of what the comprehensive expenditure review really means in finding ways that different departments and different agencies can build that teamwork with each other instead of operating in silos. So, Mr. Leswick, perhaps you can help us understand what do you think is the scope of the comprehensive expenditure review, and how does collaboration between different departments help in achieving your objectives?
Pass to Mr. LaRouche.
Thank you for the question. Well, I mean, I can't speak specifically to the example you were mentioning, but in general, the comprehensive expenditure review, one of the areas where departments were instructed to look at is areas of overlap, for example. And so, in their proposals, they were, part of the identification of efficiencies was to see if they were doing the same thing as somebody else, or maybe they could work better with each other and rely on one program instead of the other. So yes, I mean, that was a feature of the design. But in general, it was an efficiency-focused exercise and looking for ways to do the same amount of work with more efficiently with fewer resources.
Thank you for that. So, what are your expectations out of this review, and what do you expect for this committee to provide for you at the end of it to help with your deliberations?
Well, so from a macro perspective, if we just take a step back a little bit, the comprehensive expenditure review, it starts from the premise, it's looking a little bit of where was the public service going. We had identified between 2015 and 2024, over 10 years, there had been quite a bit of growth in the size of the public service. We looked at it, we have a chart in the budget, 40% increase, right? So that's quite a bit. I mean, Canadian population 16% during that same period. And so when you look at that, you have to kind of take a step back and see if we are getting services out of that or programming out of that is worth this additional costing. So part of the objective of the comprehensive expenditure review is to really try and bring back the size of the public service to a more sustainable basis. That is, if you would look at on a longer period of time, that is really after the COVID era, is kind of going back on an average growth that is a bit more sustainable. So, I mean, it's a bit of a recalibration, looking at being more efficient and going back to pre-pandemic levels of growth, and that is like a driving feature of the exercise. That's why I say, going back to my earlier point here, more than half of the savings are coming from efficiencies directly, right? But there is also a component which is looking at programming. Is the federal government offering programs that overlap a little bit what provinces are doing or what each other are doing? That's also a component that we are looking at through this review.
I'm glad you raised that. That is absolutely my next question. How do you measure efficiency versus performance for different departments, knowing just how different the programming that they offer really is? What is for example, the Department of Women and Gender Equality versus the Department of Veterans versus the Department of Defense. They all service very, very different components of Canadian society. How do you measure what's more efficient and what's not?
So we don't have like a one size fits all indicator. What the process was is departments relied on a variety of indicators. I mean, they have program evaluations, they observe data, they have a pretty good sense of what who their program reaches, what is more effective, what is less effective, and supported their ministers in making e-savings proposals. So they came back to the government and said, like, we believe that these are areas where, for a variety of reasons, are a little bit less efficient. So generally, the determination of that was done at the department level, who is more, who knows their programming best. And then central agencies like finance, like Treasury Board, like Privy Council Office supported decision makers making informed decisions on where to focus. The role of central agencies here was really focused on ensuring there would be no program integrity issues, that the reductions were sustainable, and that the health and safety of Canadians was protected.
Thanks very much. Mrs. Block.
Thank you very much, Chair, and welcome here. I guess congratulations on this new role as Deputy Minister, if you've been here for a couple of months. I want to circle back to the line of questioning by my colleague, Mr. Helland, regarding the cost of our national debt, noting that under Justin Trudeau, it doubled, and that the current Prime Minister plans to spend even more than the previous government had projected they were going to spend, which I believe results in yet higher deficits and higher costs for Canadians. After all, today's deficits are tomorrow's taxes. And so I guess my question for you, Mr. Leswick, is in your role as the Deputy Minister, what lessons have you or are you learning from the Comprehensive Expenditure Review that can be applied to future spending and future reviews? And are you developing a plan to reduce the deficit, if not in the short term, in the medium or long term?
And thank you for the question. I mean, to be quite honest, the Comprehensive Expenditure Review, I mean, it was a substantive exercise. Like when you position it against other expenditure review processes, whether that's the Deficit Reduction Action Plan under Prime Minister Harper, or the program review era, even in the late 90s. I mean, this was a substantive exercise. I mean, as a bit of a fiscal framework junkie, it is a demonstration that these types of reallocations can happen in government, not without consequence. I mean, programs are eliminated, stakeholders, employees associated with those programs are affected 100%. But I think it does demonstrate that, and I'm just speaking from like a small g government perspective, that we can, departments, bureaucracy can reallocate. And there's not this complete political abyss that doesn't allow us to do so. So that is one lesson learned, at least from my perspective. With respect to your second question, I mean, the best I can say is that, we provide the government with options, and this government's been, pretty clear that it wants to keep the deficit to GDP ratio on a downward trajectory. The deficits are sustainable in relation to our economy. And so we're conscious of that. And so, any spending proposals or tax related proposals that we bring forward are within the context of that fiscal guardrail that is set out for itself.
Thank you for that. Having been a member of Parliament for almost 18 years and serving on this committee now for the third time, I would suggest that obviously our budgeting cycle allows for the reallocation of funds within a department on a regular basis. If you look at supplementary estimates and the processes that we have there. So I'm going to go back to the purpose of the comprehensive expenditure review. If it was simply just about the ability to reallocate money, I think that was already there. But my question would be, how often does the Department of Finance plan to undertake similar spending reviews in the future? Is this going to become a regular practice for the government? And to what end, if not to start to address the deficit and the debt load that Canadians are carrying?
Yes. With respect to your first observation, I do have to say, I feel like, and other deputies that you have at this table should provide their own testimonial, but I do feel like departments feel like they're in a bit of a straitjacket, notwithstanding that they would have legal flexibility within their vote structure in order to reallocate across programs. I think once governments make announcements and they establish, those allocations against particular grants and contributions programs, they feel very hamstrung to make, or very constrained to make any reallocations between those programs, even though they exist within a single vote as determined by parliamentarians. So I think they only make these reallocations, if I'm just being honest, is under the cover of a government-wide exercise. And so I think these types of exercises give departments the opportunity to put forward reallocation proposals. At least that's just my perspective. In terms of your second question, deputies, and I'm a deputy of my own department, have certain license to make reallocations. I think without the cover of a government effort, like that you would see launched in a budget or an update, I don't think that, I think it's very difficult to do such. And so I don't know that you'll see another one of these types of expenditure review proposals set in motion until the government of the day, and that's right now under my minister and the Prime Minister would set that in motion. So there's nothing that we're working on right now.
Wonderful.
Thank you.
Thanks. We'll finish up with Mr. O'Rourke. Welcome to Ogo. 5 minutes, please.
Thank you, Chair. So I just want to get back to the question of the deficit and just explore a little bit how all deficit spending is not equal, right? So we're referring to the budget. There are expenses, government expenses like Strategic Response Fund, regional tariff relief, capital investments, trades, training. This is money that the government is spending, but in the global context, that's a lifeline for a lot of really large employers and sectors, right? Then you got your foregone revenues, like reducing the marginal effective tax rate with the productivity super deduction, which actually gives Canada the lowest marginal effective tax rate in the G7, but it's revenues that we're not collecting. But it does really support tariff-affected businesses. It's going to allow them to invest in their own capital or buildings or clean tech, and it's attracting foreign investment and also promoting domestic investment. So would you say that kind of spending is actually necessary in the current geopolitical context and the Canadian economic context right now of businesses that are being and sectors that are being targeted through unfair tariffs, and that the protection of jobs, the protection of community livelihoods is helpful? Otherwise, we end up paying for it in social services. And so I'm just wondering if you would agree with that.
I can certainly see the rationale, and thank you for the question, why the government would want to provide a bridge to some businesses so that they can get through the current tariff turmoil associated with the U.S. administration. How long that bridge is I think kind of to be determined, but I think we would probably all recognize that. But I understand what the government's trying to do in working with these sectors and these affected businesses.
In a similar vein, we're seeing major investments that are, many people would agree, long overdue in Canada, like supporting our military, like building in the Arctic, like building those major projects to keep the economy humming, things that were important all along, but we are choosing to build big now. So the separation of capital and operating in the budget, which is very, very common in municipal budgets in Ontario anyways, does that provide government with a clearer line of sight on the return on investment of that enabling infrastructure, and so how those investments are actually fueling a healthier economy?
I think the capital budgeting framework is doing what the government wants it to do, which is showcasing that part of spending, which is supposed to be focused on creating, new business investment. And so, and not everyone loves it, but I think, and it's not intended to dilute how we present our financial statements in the public accounts, but as a supplementary mechanism in order to, again, showcase what part of spending is focused on capital versus non-capital. I think it does the trick. And as you said, other jurisdictions do it, and we're trying it on for size.
Je vais juste poser une dernière question en français.
I'd just like to ask a last question in French. Given that you've conducted the review, are there measures in place for a process for ongoing improvement with processes or technology? Because as you've said, the context is changing. Everybody hopes that one day we won't need major spending to support our industries that are really being attacked right now. So when economic conditions change and things are going better and we don't need as much spending in one area, how will we reallocate funds? And within departments, how can they continue that improvement process on their own?
Je vous remercie beaucoup. C'est une excellente
Thank you
question.
very much. It's an excellent question. In fact, international organizations, including the OECD, recommend that there be an ongoing improvement process. That's really at the basis of managing public finances. And in Canada, there's a major exercise that's just concluded. It's been a bit sporadic. In the budget, there was an announcement that in the future there would be an ongoing improvement process, a review process, if you will, but more targeted. Not necessarily something that looks at all departments, but maybe a certain theme to ensure, as you've said well, that programming is still necessary and takes into account new conditions in the economy, and to find efficiencies. So in the budget, there was the announcement that in the future, there would be an ongoing improvement process, and then we can be flexible and respond to conditions as they change. Thank you.
You're done. Thank you very much for being with us. I appreciate your time. We're going to suspend for a couple moments to bring in our new witnesses. We're suspended. Welcome back, Ms. D'Souza. I have to express my disappointment you chose New York over Ogo for our last meeting, but understandable that you had work there. Anyways, it's wonderful to have you back. I understand you have an opening statement. You have 5 minutes, and then we'll go to Mr. LeBeau for 5 minutes. The floor is yours.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Sharon D'Souza, and I am the National President of the Public Service Alliance of Canada. I'm grateful to be joining you today from the traditional unceded territory of the Anishinaabe Algonquin Nation, and I thank them for allowing us to be here and for their stewardship of this land. Thank you to the members of the committee for inviting us to contribute to your study on the Comprehensive Expenditure Review. PSAC is Canada's largest public sector union, representing more than 240,000 members. Over 180,000 are public service workers. According to Treasury Board, 57.7% of federal public service workers are located outside the National Capital Region. Across the country, they deliver critical services that millions of people rely on every day. At an earlier meeting, the Secretary to the Treasury Board described this review as a real relocation exercise. And PSAC sees it differently. We see this as a cutting service, a cutting exercise. Over the next 3 years, the government plans to reduce spending by $56.7 billion across departments without clear evidence that services can be maintained with fewer resources. The President of Treasury Board told this committee that the review is not a job-cutting exercise, yet a senior official confirmed that 25,000 public service workers have already received workforce adjustment letters, an unprecedented number. We have also heard that departments are providing reassurance to affected workers. There is nothing reassuring about this process. Unions were not consulted before these decisions were made, and they have not been meaningfully engaged since. Despite assurances that frontline services will not be affected, testimony before this committee tells a different story. The government is cutting public service jobs while continuing to contract out work instead of building in-house capacity. Spending on professional and special services remains high at $26 billion. Narrow categories like IT and management consultation obscure the reality. Fewer staff and more strain on public services. More than 14,000 public PSAC members have already received workforce adjustment notices, including almost 400 at Public Safety Canada. Half of the staff at the department's Government Operations Centre received notices that their positions were at risk, threatening the round-the-clock coordination and support needed during national emergencies. At Health Canada, nearly 900 members received workforce adjustment notices. These cuts risk weakening the regulation of pharmaceutical drug and health products. At the Canada Food Inspection Agency, over 20% of the workforce is being cut, potentially slowing responses to foodborne illness outbreaks. Arbitrary cuts do not reflect the needs of a growing and aging population. They only lead to slower service delivery, reduced administrative capacity, and stalling process on department and legal obligations like the Pay Equity Act. The government is years behind launching a pay equity plan for workers in its core public administration, and the Pay Equities Commissioner's Office is severely understaffed. At the same time, there has been little progress made on the modernization of the Employment Equity Act, including implementation of the 2023 Task Force recommendation. Communities, municipalities, researchers, and rural stakeholders share these concerns. The ripple effect of these cuts will reduce service capacity and weaken the public services people in Canada depend on. PSAC urges this committee to continue its study and to hear from a broader range of voices, including unions and stakeholders from across the country. If the government is serious about building a stronger Canada, it must invest in public services and in the workers who deliver them. Investing in public services is not optional. It is essential to the health, safety, and well-being of everyone. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Mr. Lebeau, please.
Bon après-midi à tous. Je me présente
Good
Frédéric.
afternoon, everyone. Let me introduce myself, Frédéric Lebeau, President of the Union of Canadian Correctional Officers affiliated with the CSN. Although I hold this position, my substantive position remains that of a Correctional Officer 2 at the Archambault Medium Security Institution in Quebec, specifically at the Regional Mental Health Center. With me today is the second Vice President of the Union, Danielle McKinnon, who also holds the position of Correctional Officer 2 in the Pacific region at Matsky Institution. As representatives of 7,500 federal correctional officers, we appear today to share our perspective on the recent budget cuts announced during the Comprehensive Expenditure Review and the last federal budget. From the outset, when Budget 2025 was revealed in the House of Commons, we learned that federal public service employees' retirement benefits would be reduced for a non-negotiated savings worth about 0.8% of our salary. For us correctional officers who often struggle to reach normal retirement age because of the realities of our role and the cumulative psychological costs of our working conditions, the reduction of the government's unilateral decision to reduce our retirement benefit ignores the reality of our role. The reduction of previously granted retirement benefits is a lack of respect for our members. It was only on January 26th that the Correctional Service finally provided us with any information on the direct effects on our members of the measures that it intended to take to comply with its $132 million share of budget cuts. CSC announced the conversion of Grierson Institution for Men to a women's institution, resulting in 15 workforce adjustments, who are already near the end of their career, who are now forced to make quick decisions about their future. For our part, we do not understand how the Correctional Service intends to save money by changing the vocation of this institution, because many infrastructure modifications will be required, and human resources will still have to be allocated to it under its new purpose. CSC also informed us that it wishes to join or amalgamate the correctional officer workforce from certain proximal penitentiaries. On the other hand, CSC quickly changed its mind and narrowed the list of institutions for which it aims to adopt a more versatile workforce management model. For the institutions that remain in CSC's sites, we are concerned about the model it seems to propose. We believe that if CSC were to proceed as it has indicated to us by terminating any agreement that we have negotiated to regulate the movement of staff between the minimum and medium or maximum security units, it will not save money, and our most senior members will lose the opportunity to work in places that allow them to decompress towards the end of their correctional service careers. An increase in absenteeism and in injuries related to psychological stress is also to be expected, as well as an increase in requests for accommodation measures for people for whom the time spent working in maximum and medium security level institutions has already exhausted their psychological reserves. CSC plans to recover nearly 40 FTEs by reducing by half the Day Mobile Patrol, whose job it is to monitor the perimeter and to respond to incidents such as escape attempts or the introduction of contraband. In addition, all posts linked to the Integrity Program created in 2008 and spread through 22 institutions, this is 54.6 FTEs, to allow a punctual response to increased deliveries, now mainly by drones, will be abolished. Several institutions will lose staff in towers, in our yards, and in several other activity sectors. However, CSC has attempted to explain these staff reduction choices by citing the introduction of technologies to counter drug trafficking and contraband within prisons. While some technologies are indeed being used to help correctional officers reduce the scourge of the introduction of drugs and contraband by drones and the use of cell phones, the organized crime community is constantly reviewing its methods so that any technology quickly becomes circumventable or obsolete. During these announcements, and again in connection with the services directly assigned to the battle against drugs in prisons, the CSC also announced a regional model of drug detector dogs. Each institution has 2 or 3 dedicated dog handlers. The decision to consolidate the workforce in a regional model risks reducing the performance of our detector dogs while increasing costs and reducing search activities, as well as eliminating the deterrence created by the presence of dogs and their handlers during inmate visiting activities. Several positions in the Structured Intervention Units, SIUs, will also be abolished. SIUs will be classified into two categories, small or large, and the number of correctional officers will be adjusted accordingly. This will result in an overall reduction of 21.78 FTEs across all the institutions concerned: Port Cartier, Edmonton, Saskatchewan, Kent, Atlantic, Donnacona, Millhaven. Aligning the size of SIUs with actual inmate occupancy may result in increased violence and make it more difficult for the Correctional Service to meet its obligations to inmates in SIUs. In addition, more than 29 multifunction positions in the 96 bed units will be eliminated. In closing, 22 escort positions will also be eliminated. CSC also wants to cut training for new recruits. These cuts will affect security in the institution and will have an impact on the level of preparedness when these recruits arrive at the institution. It should be noted that prior to the federal budget cuts, CSC and the union were of the view that the quality and quantity of training offered to correctional officers should be increased to better equip them to fulfill the mandate entrusted to us by Canadians. Thank you.
With Mr. Caputo. Mr. Caputo, welcome to OGO. 6 minutes,
Thank you
please.
very much, Mr. Chair. Thank you to all of our witnesses, Mr. Lebeau, Mr. McKinnon. I've obviously had a lot of dealings with UCO, and I want to welcome you both to your new positions. We haven't had a chance to meet formally in committee. Mr. McKinnon, I'm going to direct some questions towards you, and Mr. Lebeau, feel free to weigh in. Drones are a huge issue and directly impact officer safety, correct? Yes. In fact, they drop contraband, they drop drugs, they drop ceramic blades, things like that that can be used to stab officers. Is that right?
That's correct.
And we are going to, in fact, there's such a problem, and drugs in jail are such a problem that we've seen a number of impacts. In fact, are you familiar with Fraser Valley Institution, Mr. McKinnon?
Yes, sir.
And were you aware, or can you comment on a program, I'm not sure if you're aware of the program, in which dogs are brought to Fraser Valley Institution where inmates tend to them and things like that? Are you aware of such a program?
Yes, I am aware of the program.
And were you aware that a dog actually overdosed on narcotics, I was told? Is that accurate?
I can't speak to that. I'm not aware of that.
Okay, that's just what I was told. What percentage of job cuts are management versus frontline for CSC?
That's a good question. We can talk about ETP, FTEs. On our side, we're talking about more than 100 correctional officer that's going to lose some FTEs at the end of this exercise. It's massive. We talk about security. We talk about patrol, mobile patrol, SIU services. So it's a lot. It's a lot of CX that is going to be affected with those.
How many jobs are being eliminated from regional headquarters? Any idea?
No.
As in we haven't been told, or zero, or both?
I don't know. We don't know the answer.
Okay. I'll assume zero if you haven't been told. How about national headquarters? How many jobs have been were set to be cut from NHQ?
That's a good question. They didn't inform.
Well, I think they didn't inform because it's zero. Would it be fair to say that the Correctional Service of Canada is a bureaucracy at the national headquarters and regional headquarters level?
It's a huge organization, and at the end of the day, their CSC is having RHQ and HQ. There's a lot of people who's working there. It's pretty hard for us to comment on how many people are working here in Ottawa or even in the region. Our core business for us, correctional officer, we're dealing with stuff inside the institution. So it's pretty hard to me to say, yes, there's a lot of people or enough or too much, so I cannot comment on this one.
Okay. Now, in terms of safety and security of officers, I mean, I've been to a number of institutions. I worked for federal corrections. This is a vulnerability in part because of small things like the unwillingness of the CSE to supply razor blades that disintegrate. I think you probably know what I'm talking about. There are razor blades out there that if you go to use them as a weapon, they will disintegrate. CSE doesn't supply those. I know that officer safety is a big issue, and now when it comes to drones and detection technology, CSC is cutting those types of things to intercept contraband, will that ultimately make officers more safe or less safe?
Absolutely, will make officer less safe. We're having drones on a daily basis across our institution, like coast to coast. We're having assault on a daily basis. Correctional officer has been assaulted. There's not a single day I'm not receiving a phone call from the Monitor Center telling me that, Fred, okay, there's an officer has been assaulted in Kent. There's an officer has been also assaulted in Donnacona. We have, like, in the last month, we had 3 murders in Donnacona.
This is just, I'm going to just speak. Normally I would like to ask questions, but I've got 1 minute left, and I will say this. Being a correctional officer is one of the most difficult occupations. It's one of the bravest occupations. The fact that you have to go to jail and worry about being stabbed by contraband that could be detected by drone and is not, and you have to live through that, putting your lives on the line for a salary that is substantially lower than other peace officers, to me, is repugnant. And the fact that the government is cutting those things that would help protect you and not cutting an ounce of bureaucracy, government should be ashamed. Thank you.
You have more time.
I apologize, Mr. Caputo. I reduced it by 1 minute. You have 1 more minute.
Oh, but I just ended so well. Okay. Do you have anything to say to that?
No, it's a tough job, and you're right, and nobody decide to become, as a child, to become correctional officer. It's a passion. We are working near each community across Canada, and it's a tough job, you're right. It's not an easy one, and for sure when we're cutting, when CSC telling us, the government's telling us that they're cutting 132.2 million, it's afraid us. It's worrying. For sure.
Yes. Now, people who assault you, when people do assaults, it used to be that they would go to higher security or the SHU, the Special Handling Unit. Is that the case anymore?
It is, but it's more complicated and very complicated to get to the SHU at the end of the day.
And sometimes we have a modified segregation unit, the SIU, which an inmate can only stay for 60 days. But what does CSC do? They actually just transfer them to another jail. Is that right? And they do that by charter plane, which costs millions a year.
Absolutely.
Is that right?
There's probably an economy of cost to do there, for sure.
They are literally transferring inmate from jail to jail because an inmate can only stay in the SIU for up to 60 days. So rather than reintegrate them by law, they will literally just put them in a new jail and say, look, we took them out of the SIU. So they go from province to province, region to region on charter aircraft. Is that accurate?
In some case, yes, and we need to keep that tool. It's very important because we need to keep a kind of in coma segregation because it's like the same thing like in the community. If you're not having police quarter, you're will be in danger.
Waste of money to transfer inmates by charter aircraft from jail to jail just to comply with unworkable regulations.
Thanks, gentlemen, and I apologize for cutting you off early, Mr. Caputo. We made up for it by allowing you extra time. Mr. Gasparo, please, for 6.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you all for your service. My questions will be directed primarily to you, Mr. McKinnon, and you, Mr. Lebeau. As a parliamentary secretary for combating crime, I've had the opportunity to visit the Bath Correctional Institution just outside of Kingston, meet with its leadership team, and see firsthand the important work our correctional officers do every day and the risk they and you put yourselves in. Frankly, I learned about some of the challenges encountered by the officers, including outdated digital tools and challenges with upgrading physical infrastructure within the buildings themselves. So our new government is taking strides to address these two concerns specifically. How do you see improvements in these domains as helping correctional officers do their jobs?
No, go. If I may, you probably visit Mr. Gasparo, Unit 2 in Bath. That was supposed to be just a short-term location for a couple of months. It's been many years. It's an aging infrastructure. It's dangerous to holding inmates over there. So yes, we need to invest massively. This government needs to invest massively in infrastructure. We had our new commissioner who testified on the supplementary budget a couple of weeks ago, and he was stating the same thing. It's very important because of the aging of the structure. Yeah, we need more money for sure.
If I recall correctly, the temporary, and I'm using air quotes, facility, I think was from the late 90s, if I recall. So there have been successive governments that have allowed that structure to remain. Am I correct? And is my memory correct? And I'm not going to put you on the spot. I was there as well, and I can't remember the exact date, but.
I don't have the date exactly, but it's been a while. I think it's more than 30 years.
Correct. Yeah, that was my understanding. So you've had successive governments under both parties since then that have allowed that structure to remain. Thank you for that. I appreciate it. So in regards to unfortunate but sometimes necessary reductions in the workforce, can you advise on what steps can be taken to support employees affected by reductions in expenditures?
Well, let's take the example of the mobile patrol. It's a good example. The government and the CSC wants to reduce on the weekdays for one mobile patrol. So for sure, it's going to create some dangerous situation because those mobile are there to answer on drones, drone answering protocol. They're there to intercept some visitor that they cannot belong on the premises of the institution. So at the end of the day, it's creating more work. It's creating more like place and gap that the criminal will be able to try to introduce contraband and try to fill that gap with contraband.
Great. How much time, Chair, am I?
2 minutes and 30 seconds.
Great, thank you. How can Correctional Services Canada or other government agencies support employees' career transitions or next steps in their career?
I think it's pretty minimal, to be honest with you. Just take the example of the 15 FTEs that we're having in Grierson. Middle manager meet with them. They had to take a decision almost like very rapidly. They had a month to take their decision what they will do. Afterwards, the transition to career, it's pretty non-existent with their offer like EAP. So, yeah, it's very minimal transition. There is not having a lot of services, to be honest with you, sir.
Okay, thank you. This is probably for you, Ms. D'Souza, but anyone can feel free to answer. Departments have said that services to Canadians will not be impacted by the SUR cuts. Frontline workers who work to protect Canadians, our borders and our sovereignty around the clock, like CBSA, RCMP, and the Canadian Armed Forces, have a separate early retirement initiative referred to as 25 and out. In your capacity as president of PSAC, have you seen examples of where Canadians and their essential services will be put at risk due to the SUR reductions?
Yes, without a doubt. Currently, we have notification that Canada Border Services Agency itself has provided roughly, and I'm just looking at the number right here, 447 workers have received affected letters. That means workers that are doing administrative work, they're border service officers, and some of them even report to Ottawa. This agency hasn't been staffed up. We're talking about since its inception, right? It's doing the best they can with the most minimum amount of oversight and structure. And putting money to electronic devices such as drones isn't going to help. You need to have the boots on the ground and the infrastructure within the actual agency. So when we're looking at this, there has been no consultation. And the people on the ground actually know what the hell they're doing, excuse my language. So why aren't we looking at that instead of looking at expensive toys that may or may not work?
It's interesting, though. Okay, Mrs. Souza, we had the Treasury Board here. We've had other departments here saying there aren't any cuts to frontline services when it comes to CBSA, the Canadian Armed Forces, and those within our national security apparatus. So I'm a little confused at how your position can be there are impacts to frontline services when everyone else is saying there isn't.
Ms. D'Souza, we are past our time, but perhaps we can get to that in one of our next interventions. Madame Goudreau, please.
Merci beaucoup, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I really don't have enough time, but I think my comments might give you an interest in wanting to come see. In 2 weeks, it's my 4th visit. I was at the penitentiary, Macassa, which is in my writing. Honestly, I was shocked. Dominique Leblanc had the 3D experience simulations of what happens if you've never been to a penitentiary, a prison institutions. I invite you to do so. I spent hours there. What I've understood is, well, my simple question, do you feel safe at work? It's very difficult when every day a correctional officer is attacked at a penitentiary in one area or another. It's very dangerous. Every day we wonder, we know when we start, but we don't know what time we will finish because there's a lack of staff, perhaps. Or will there be a drone? Will we be taking contraband? So it's a very challenging environment. It's very difficult these days. So overtime, equipment, protective equipment, is it up to date? And then we're talking about weapons. If it comes in, and with Macassa, I invite you to come see. It's 2 hours from here. It's open. It's a medium security institution. There's freedom. I really like to recognize all of the staff at Macassa who gave me that experience in terms of security. Do we have the tools, the cameras, the communication, the perimeter coverage? Are we up to date? No, absolutely not. It's like a Stranger Things episode from the 80s. That's the technology we have in our penitentiaries. We need to invest massively in radio, in communication, in drone systems. We are fighting organized crime every day. That's what we do. Criminals come into the institution in prison and they continue their crime throughout their incarceration. So we need to be aware of that. It's important to invest more and to change infrastructure. Please know that we hear you. We see what's happening. I was accompanied by the critic, Madame de Bellefeuille, who met with Drummondville, which, for practical ends, has the highest rate of overtime. That's a sign. And we won't talk about the next generation. I'm talking about public safety. If you're told you're risking your life, there's just 7,500 of you. Not that bad. But this is public safety for everyone. Absolutely, you are right. A number of institutions in our country are in our communities. They are close. Our institutions are close to schools and homes. So having lackluster security has risk not just for correctional officers, but for Canadians in general. You're right. I can tell you that I spent hours there. I saw psychologists, people who were there working, and they didn't have equipment that parliamentarians have when we go to stores and we can push a panic button. They are in there, in cells, with inmates. My God, what is this? You need to come see Macassa. It's like from the Cold War era. And there are two people together. What happens when you have two inmates in the same cell? Well, that adds greater complexity, managing two inmates in a cell that's not very big at the outset. It's more complex. It's a real challenge, really difficult to manage. If we don't know when and how drones arrive, there's drugs, there's weapons, but we're not able to detect anything or not detect enough. And you're going to lose your resource for tracking, and they'll be there once in a while. So what will the impact of that be? Are you going to become the dogs yourselves? Doesn't make any sense. The mission of correctional service, well, the rehabilitation of an inmate, without that, crime goes up. When crime goes up, each member of the public is impacted. So it's important to have those meetings today with all of you to raise awareness, because this is a closed environment. When crime goes up, violence goes up, having 2 inmates in a cell. Mr. Chair, I'm really out of time, but I'd like for you to provide a report of all of the details, because I spent 4 hours there. There's a lot. We'll add that. We'll also ask people to appear to tell us as much as possible, because an hour ago we were talking about investments in defense, but then we're not protecting you. And they say they're setting priorities, but clearly you're not a priority. $130 million in cuts, that's unacceptable. There should be an investment of $130 million. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
For 5.
Thank you very much, everyone, for being here today. Ms. D'Souza, I'm just going to start with you. I'm just wondering, can you just confirm the committee that PSAC represents the workers at the border?
That is correct. We do.
Okay, and you mentioned in your opening remarks about the 26,000 cuts to the public service. I'm just wondering if you can elaborate a little bit on impacts for CBSA that is having.
Thank you. Right now, I can tell you that we've received information that roughly 447 workers at the Canada Border Service Agency have received workforce adjustment notification. What that translates to, we don't know. And the government has over the next 3 years to determine if there's further notification coming. Is there impacts? Yes, there are, because they're short staff already. We know, and when we're looking at the feeder groups to staff up officers, there's competition with RCMP, local police as well. And so we know the government has made a commitment to staff up by 1,000 officers. But then if you're in dire need of officers, why are you providing workforce adjustment notification? So it just doesn't make sense. And it concerns me because these are already trained. They've already gone through the rigorous training at Rigaud. And anyone who's gone through it knows one small infraction and you're kicked out. You don't move forward. So these are trained officers. These are people who are trained in the actual administration and support services. And many of them report to the National Capital Region. So my concern is, what are we really doing here? Are we looking at CBSA in an overall capacity? Are we looking at the future and what's required to support it? Or are we just doing an elimination exercise here? And that's how I really feel that's been happening with all the departments. The lack of review of the programs themselves, looking at the impacts to the Canadian public, to the stakeholders that depend on it, it concerns me greatly. I feel like this is just, cross the top cutting exercise and let things fall where they may.
I've been hearing concerns from a lot of the communities that I represent that there is going to be an impact to the hours of operation at the border crossings. Do you share that same concern? And are you hearing of some concerns from the folks that you represent about that as well?
Without a doubt. It seems like we've become a tourism port, to put it in a lack of better ways. I've never known a port that can only be open during a specific period of time. It just doesn't make sense to me. A port is a point of security. The threat doesn't end, it doesn't work 9 to 5. So I'm a little bit concerned about the decision-making that's being done, and I'm concerned about the smaller rural communities that depend on that port for businesses. to move products back and forth between the United States. And so what kind of consultation has been done in those rural communities? I don't think there's been anything.
Yeah, I can tell you from the mayors and the councilors and the people that I talk to on a regular basis, there's been no consultation at all done with them. Are you concerned too about having physically present officers replaced with technology? Are you concerned about that?
Very much, very much. AI cannot replace a human being. And the work that our members do, they're highly trained. There's things that AI will not pick up on. In fact, I can tell you that in some cases, some ports use students. There's a bridging program where students are used in certain capacity. Students aren't trained the same way a border service officer is trained. The level of training is very minute, but yet they're used. And to me, that's a health and safety risk for that young person, but it's also an impact to our security. There is a shortage of staff, but the answer is not AI. The answer is staffing up appropriately. If we're serious about being defenders of our country, if we're serious about doing this, then we need to invest in the people that do it.
Have they been consulted about AI? Have you been consulted about the government's expansion of AI at ports?
Brief answer, yes and no. Depends on department. It depends on the technology. But I would say there hasn't been meaningful consultation.
Thank you.
Thanks. Ms. Rochford.
Thank you very much. But certainly, I understand that Correctional Service of Canada is one of the government's largest agencies. Would that be correct? It operates 43 institutions nationwide. It employs approximately almost 19,000 staff. What percentage of that number would be members of your union of Canadian Correctional Officers?
7,500 correctional officer over the amount that you just said. So.
I was noting that the reduction, I guess, in the full-time FTEs is approximately 850 FTEs through the Comprehensive Expenditure Review. What percentage of that number would be members of your union?
Most like near 400.
Half?
That range?
400?
Yes, of FTEs, yeah.
And I was noting the budget of about $3.8 billion for the agency. And I think someone mentioned that through the Comprehensive Expenditure Review, we're looking at savings of approximately $132 million. So would that be correct?
Yeah, the saving that CSC told us in government was $132.2 million at the last budget. You're right.
And so basically, when you read the plan for Correctional Services Canada with respect to how they plan to reorganize themselves, they talk specifically about focusing on critical priorities, flattening the organizational structures. They talk about aligning with modern practices, overall reducing administrative burdens. And they also say that they're going to reorganize the office footprint and regional arrangements to improve efficiency, consistency, and accountability. And so from my perspective, as I look at this being a very large government department, understanding that it's very important work and dangerous work, as you've described, nonetheless, I feel that there's a plan here that seems to make sense. And to me, it's about enabling the government here in this particular instance and the Correctional Service of Canada to spend less so that they can invest more. And I heard you clearly say, Mr. Lebeau, that investment is required. You said investment in digital tools. You spoke about infrastructure. And so as I look at this plan, I'm saying that is what they're trying to achieve here. So this is a good plan in a certain sense. And I would be interested in your views about what is good about this plan, not what is wrong with the plan. I'd be interested to hear your views on what is good about this particular plan.
It's a good question. To be honest, the plan on paper seems to be not that bad. You're right. We're saving money. We're saving like Canadian people money. But at the end of the day, it's our safety and our security. When you're reducing FTEs over SIU, when you're reducing FTEs over mobile, when you're attacking this dynamic security inside, the active security inside our all institution, that plan doesn't make sense at all. Because we're combating drones, we're combating crimes, we're combating like firearm, we're combating a ton of things inside our institution, and we need to make sure that the money goes at the right place. I'm not against like flattening the region. I'm not against improving people who's working here in Ottawa or is working in the region. No, not at all. But at least we need to improve our all our institutions across the country for sure.
And so basically, to some extent, it's about shifting resources, correct? From administrative burdens more so with ensuring the frontline service providers are able to do their job. Do you see the plan in any way supporting that particular direction?
When we've been briefed by CSC, it was not a long time ago, 26th of January, we still need to work with CSC to flatten those angles because we don't know yet what's going to be the outcome and how it's going to be managed. And it's pretty important to know how CSC will land on certain files.
Quickly then, I'd like to touch maybe on the workforce adjustments that are taking place. Has there been any specific support that's been mentioned to help your members navigate this transition?
I apologize. Very brief answer, please.
Oh my gosh, that went too fast.
It went fast, huh? No, not that much. Just like I mentioned to Mr. Gasparola, we're talking about EAP, and that's not that much.
Madame Gaudreau, please.
Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Don't be shy. When I'm carried away, I'll push my microphone away. It's important because your hearing health is important. I'll speak now to the Public Service Alliance of Canada. It's concerning what's happening. Regarding veterans, we're very concerned as well. The services provided to them. We'll try to shed light on that. So 4,447 letters have been received to say, be careful, watch out, the door is wide open. If you want, you can negotiate, maybe not like the CEO of Air Canada, but you can negotiate your exit, and maybe, because eventually we'll lack know-how and knowledge, maybe you can come back as a contractor. Is that something that could happen? Or what do you think?
I think anything's possible. What we can tell you is what we've seen through many, many times when services are cut and the need is still there, the government does one or two things. They contract out or they start hiring up again. And we've seen this with the compensation advisors when they decided to launch Phoenix. By the way, Phoenix was an IBM creation. You know, what ended up happening? Well, it was failing. They tried to hire everyone up, but people left to other jobs. So they looked at other solutions as Band-Aid solutions. And I just want to bring your attention to something else, because IBM received another contract. And in fact, that contract was to assist with old age security. And CRAM, if you've ever heard of that, 85,000 seniors did not get paid accurately or on time. You would think after Phoenix that we've learned our lesson on contracting out. Well, guess what? And to rub salt in the wound, can you imagine people who've lost their spouse receiving checks for their deceased spouse? Then let's talk about what happens when you don't get properly paid on time. Well, that means that you're dependent on that check and you have to look at an alternative source of income. What does that mean? Going to food banks. The emotional turmoil that we see and the impact of contracting out is unbelievable. So who, at the end of the day, is responsible? And that's the problem with all these cuts and the use of AI and the implementation of contracting out this work. It just ends up costing the government more money. Phoenix is $5 billion. So we're doing this analysis right now in time. But let's talk about 3 years, 5 years, 8 years, 10 years. What is this going to cost us? Cost savings doesn't work in this manner. And so when we're looking at all of this, I just want to point out it's the most vulnerable in our society that gets hit the hardest. But it seems like the government priorities shift and change and then become something else, and they are forgotten.
J'apprécie beaucoup la divulgation de votre
I
information.
appreciate the information. When I go home, I'm from Laurentides-Labelle in Quebec. There's a scandal of a few $1 million, and that becomes a big issue. But here it's 5, 10, 15 times more money, billions of dollars. And that's part of the culture. Well, come on. Is there somebody who's going to wake up? Now we're talking about $130 million for correctional services for agents. Now there are cuts because there are priorities. Well, come on. When will we take the bull by the horns, grow a spine, make real decisions? Because, well, there are other scandals that are coming. But I thank you. Because I have a few seconds left, I'll tell you, I hate it. Often, well, there was an earthquake today. I talked about it, and it happened. I don't want this to happen. Are we going to wait to have a murder, an incident, an escape? I'm telling you, they're telling us it's coming. There are about 10 institutions that are totally outdated. Wake up. Thank you.
Thank you, Madame Gaudreau. Mrs. Jansen, please, and then we'll go to Ms. Khalid, and then back forth.
Thank you. I'm going to direct my question to Mr. McKinnon. Last summer, I had the opportunity to visit the Matsqui Penitentiary with my colleague here, Mr. Caputo, and it became very clear that there was a problem there. They've already had multiple incidents where contraband is literally thrown over the fence. It's not smuggled in some sophisticated way. They just tossed it over like it was a backyard. And we're talking about packages landing inside the perimeter containing drugs, cell phones, even weapons. It got so bad there that they had to build a second fence to try and stop it. A second fence, like they would have to throw it harder in order to get it into the yard. That was their solution. And from what the officers are saying, it's not exactly Fort Knox. People are still finding ways around it because fences don't stop the problem. People do. Now, dog units do. Patrols do. Experienced correctional officers do. So what's the government's big idea when they're cutting? Like, are they going to cut searches? They're going to reduce patrols? The very things that actually catch this stuff before it spreads through the institution. And here's the part that I think that should concern every Canadian. When this contraband gets inside, it doesn't just sit there. It fuels violence, it creates debt, it drives intimidation, and the people standing in the middle of that storm are correctional officers. Men and women are already dealing with some of the highest PTSD rates in the country, and now we're making their job harder. So I have to ask, if we already can't stop drugs and weapons from getting over the fence, what exactly is the plan when they start removing the people responsible for catching them once they're in?
I think that the CSC wants to rely on technology. They want to rely on drone detection. They want to rely on perimeter security. And we're finding that the inmates are catching up with the technology faster than we can implement it. And therefore, it's becoming obsolete. And so, of course, the solution to that for us is boots on the ground. You talked about drug dog detectors, their footprint in the institutions being reduced, as well as a reduction of mobile patrols on the outside of the institution. Inmates are reverting to the throw-over method again, which is kind of went went away for a little while with the introduction of drones. So now we're getting it in both drones, we're getting it in throwovers, and we need the staff and the correctional officers on the ground to intervene in those instances.
When we visited, I have to say, employee morale was like at a maximum low. We heard that when they finally have downtime, they actually go online looking for another job. So admin basically was putting policies in place that put their lives at risk. I remember one of the places we went to where they allowed range lunch, like a mixed range lunch, so that everybody could socialize. And they said that just immensely put much more risk on the officers. And I was really honestly shocked by the willful blindness of admin to put lives at risk like this. And I feel like this is just another one of those things. Can you please let me know, is it the same thing?
Yeah, I mean, I think you're talking about the reintroduction of meal line with the inmates, and of course, allowing for large gatherings like that, which hadn't happened for many years, increases the risk for officers. When you bring sometimes hundreds of inmates into gatherings like that, it increases the risks of incidents. It allows for the passing of contraband, and just overall risk to the correctional officers rises.
Yeah, they were really clear. They basically said it distracts them because they have too many people to watch. So someone can distract them over here while someone else attacks someone over there. And they willfully continued that practice. I don't know where that's at now, but I was shocked to see admin ignoring that, and as well shocked to see the low morale of the staff. So this, I can imagine, would make it even worse to have less staff.
Yeah, certainly. And I mean, morale for us is a big issue. You know, we talk about accountability within the walls of the institution for the inmates that work or that live there, and when they're not being held to account, it's very easy for morale to drop for correctional officers because they don't feel supported by the management group, and they feel like they're working against the grain.
That is absolutely what we heard. Thank you.
Thanks. We'll go to Ms. Khalid and then Mr. Boulouris.
Thank you, Chair. Just quickly before I get into it, Mr. Souza, in your remarks just now, you had talked about some 440 letters of termination that had been sent to frontline officers. Can you please help us understand? Because my understanding from public safety and from TBS is that that's not accurate, that no frontline officer has received any such letter.
Thank you. I can tell you that in terms of 447 letters, I can tell you there are a mix of different occupations, and I can tell you that there are border service officers who did, in fact, receive letters because I received them personally. They're required by law, by our collective agreement, to give us notice.
Thank you. I appreciate that. So, I mean, there's a difference here between who is a frontline officer and who is admin staff, regardless of the department that they are working on. Is that correct?
That is correct.
Thank you. So you had also said in your opening remarks, you had talked about, public service receiving letters, and I'm just wanting to correct because the way that I understood it, you implied that these letters were terminating their employment. Now, my understanding is that they were given options, and I just want to go over the options just so that Canadians can understand exactly what public servants were provided with. So option A, the employee remains employed and continues to be paid while receiving priority consideration for available jobs for up to 12 months. Option B is a transition support measure where the employee leaves the public service and receives a lump sum payment based on their years of service. Option C1 is an education allowance with a transition support measure where the employee leaves the public service but receives financial support to pursue educational studies. And then option C, part 2, education leave without pay, where the employee receives financial support and an education allowance for tuition and can take up to 2 years of leave without pay. At the end of that leave period, the employee is laid off but receives priority consideration for available jobs for up to 12 months. Now, can you confirm whether this framework was something that the government imposed on its own, or was it actually negotiated between government officials and bargaining agents?
Thank you for your question. So what you've read out is further in the workforce adjustment process. We're at the beginning right now where the notifications have sent out. The process is outlined in our collective agreements that have been negotiated.
I understand that. I'm just trying to understand how were these options compiled and put together in the first place. I'm just wondering if bargaining agencies had any say in this, or did the government just come up with it on its own?
So I'm going to do a little bit of a history, and God help us all. But under the Chrétien government, when we got hit the hardest, this is something when we actually negotiated in our collective agreement, because the process in which people were terminated wasn't fair or transparent. And for us, it was important to actually negotiate something that in which it was clear. And so this actual article in our collective agreement has evolved over many, many years. And
so it is something that was put together between all the different parties involved, not just something that the government's come up with on its own. Thank you for that. I'm just going to move really quickly. I understand I'm really short on time. So you had mentioned about CBP, OAS, and EI, and all of that. They're all supported by statutory funding, which means that the benefits will always be paid. They will be paid out. And these are services that Canadians who have worked, contributed to their communities, and contributed to Canada really rely on. And our government, I hope, is prioritizing protecting these services. So it's my understanding that the public servants who process these claims will not be impacted by any of the cuts, as the operating funds for administering these programs is also statutory. Now, are you aware of how many public servants work to administer these vital benefits? And as Canadians continue to age, I can assume that we'll need more and more of these individuals working in these programs. So I would assume that we are likely to have that increase.
20 seconds, oh boy. Short answer is, first of all, old age security is funded through Canada Revenue Agency. And if you cut the people at Canada Revenue Agency that bring the money into the government, well, that means there's less funding. The people that actually work at ESDC, currently there's 1,793 notices plus 800 terms that were not renewed. That means slower benefits. I can also tell you, as being a Canada Pension Plan benefit officer, that was my actual work. I can tell you without a doubt, when you introduce new technology, there's problems. That's one of the issues that you have. There's no guarantee, as the people who received the old age security found out, 85,000 of them. There's no guaranteed employment. It's based on the funding to the department, and the department decides. Thank you.
Thanks, Mr. Boulerice. Welcome back, sir. The floor is yours for 5 minutes.
Merci beaucoup, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you to the representatives who are with us today, who are sharing a very important perspective, not only for their members, but also for the people of this country. We're in a situation that's pretty unique. We have a Liberal government that refuses to tackle web giants that are not paying their fair share. They're not going after billionaires and the super rich who aren't paying their fair share. And the government is spending on defense like it's an open bar. And then 40,000 positions are going to be eliminated from public services to Quebecers and Canadians. The Liberal government wants us to believe that cutting 40,000 positions will have no consequence on services to the public. Ms. D'Souza, could you give us an example or two? What can people expect following drastic wall-to-wall cuts of 15% nearly everywhere?
What you're going to experience, and we've seen this before, this is our history. So we know without a doubt when you have those kind of cuts, that means slower wait times. You will not get the services that you need, and there will be people falling through the cracks. There will be veterans, there will be seniors, and there will be those who are at the most vulnerable, those who are looking for employment insurance, passports. There is going to be a halting of service that will take months and months to get back on track, which means the government will have to spend more money or contract that work out. And we know every time that they contract the work out, it in fact costs the government more money because then they have to hire federal public sector workers or existing workers to clean up the mess.
Donc, même les perspectives ou espoirs.
So even hopes of saving public money will be canceled in large part by the need to pay consultants or contractors. In Rosemont La Petite Patrie, I'm the member for a riding where there are a lot of immigration cases. Immigration Canada has longer and longer wait times, which are totally unreasonable. Entire families are living in uncertainty. It creates a lot of anxiety. They don't get responses from the department. In your view, cutting hundreds or thousands of jobs, what will that mean for those people who are waiting details on their case?
Right now, I can tell you the wait time is going to get larger. It will get larger. There's nothing that we can do. IRCC, the cuts have been unbelievable, and the wait times have now increased. I can tell you there's 1,231 notifications, and they're increasing. So here we are. We know the wait times are there, and there's not much we're going to do. And if you look at the training it takes to actually get someone fully trained, we're talking about a year or two. The question is, can those in Canada wait a year or two?
Souvent, c'est facile de dire on va éliminer des
Often it's easy to say public servant positions will be cut. It looks good in the media, and people don't really know what these people do. There's the impression there will be no impact. I want to talk about something very specific. I don't want to scare people, but there are people from the Professional Institute of the Public Service who told us a few weeks ago that cuts to the Food Inspection Agency of Canada, what impact will that have on the health and safety of the public?
After the last round of cuts under Harper, we have not seen an increase to the number of inspectors. It's an agency, it's frailing right now. It's just there's not enough people to do the work. If we actually cut 20% off the top, I can tell you it puts Canada's food security at risk. The government does not work in isolation via department. It works as a whole. It works as a safety net to hold Canadians safe. And one little piece is going to actually impact other places. PSAC, we have over 8,000 members at Correction Services Canada. What you don't know is that the teachers, as well as some who are, they actually do community employment coordinators who find jobs for these inmates. So what happens? People get incarcerated. They look to get their education. Many of them are illiterate. If you cut the educators, what chance do they have in terms of finding employment outside? You cut those who actually get them employment. Guess what? Without a good job, it's a proven fact that they are in fact incarcerated again. So what we're talking about is the safety of the officers, but we're also talking about these cuts are going to create and impact the actual cycle. So you are going to be continuously spending, and that makes no sense.
Being with us. Before you all go, first of all, thank you for being with us again. Mr. McKenna, I just want to ask a quick question of you. The Edmonton Institution for Women used to be in my riding, but of course the slight border changed. Now it's right on the border of my riding. If you've ever been there, it's medium, minimum, and maximum security all in one. The fences are basically a chain link fence backing onto parking lots, car dealerships. So we have an issue where criminals will just walk through and push the drugs through the fence, and then, of course, throw it over, or there's the issue of drones. What was the justification to reducing the foot patrols outside or the canine sniffer units? I'm trying to wrap my head around, I realize there has to be some changes, and there's only a finite amount of resources, but what was the justification around that? And I'm thinking selfishly around the institution that's in Edmonton.
Yeah, you're right. You're talking about the Edmonton Institution for Women. It's like, it's in the neighborhood. You're right. It's just near a dealership, and we had like so many incidents over that place that people were going there and try to introduce contraband and reducing like the dog and lure portion of it there, reducing the patrol, the mobile will put more the institution at risk for sure. And when you're having community around surrounded by the institution, it's creating a huge challenge for sure for correctional officer. Right. You're creating more criminality around.
Well, thank you again for being with us. Colleagues, just very quickly, this Thursday we run into witness issues with cancellations. So our good clerk has slotted in the procurement ombudsman. I figure we can go over his most recent report on the Indigenous procurement. On the 30th, we've invited, as part of the main estimates, PCO and Transport Safety Board. May 5th, 1 hour will be the President of the Treasury Board. Second hour will be Minister Lightbound. Because they're both appearing in that time, the next meeting after will have the second hour of each department for their officials. And the 28th, I will ask you to canvass your parties. I understand that's the announcement, or that will be the date of the economic update. I would ask that you all canvass your parties, whether we will be meeting on that date, and get back to me. Unless it's unanimous, we will go ahead with slot in a meeting. If it's unanimous to pass it, then we won't meet that date because of the economic update.
I think my understanding is that TBS is the second hour and PSPC is the first hour. Sure. I think so.
I'm just going by what I'm reading at the first name there, but yes. But they're both appearing the same time, so we won't have time with the officials, so that would be the next meeting. Wonderful. Everyone, thank you very much. I appreciate your patience. And witnesses, again, thank you very much for being with us today. It was a very good meeting, very informative. We are adjourned. Thank you, sir.